Claire Warren stood in the grand hall of the neutral space station, her eyes moving from one alien delegate to another. The room was filled with strange shapes and colors. Beings from across the galaxy gathered to discuss a fragile peace treaty. She was the youngest human ambassador ever sent to such a meeting, and she knew every word she spoke mattered. The air in the hall was heavy. Guards in polished armor stood along the walls, their weapons at rest but ready. Towering above everyone was the Galactic King of the Zotheri Empire. His skin was deep bronze, his crown made of living crystal that pulsed with light. When he spoke, his voice carried across the chamber like rolling thunder. For hours, the talks went in circles. The king wanted more territory for his empire. Claire's role was to protect human interests and defend smaller allied worlds from being absorbed into Zotheri control. She spoke clearly and calmly, reminding the council of the treaty's purpose. But the king's eyes narrowed. He was not used to being challenged, especially by a human. The room grew quiet when Claire explained why the humans could not agree to his new demands. Her words were direct but respectful. She expected a heated reply, maybe even a threat. Instead, the king rose from his throne, stepped down toward her, and without warning, struck her across the face. The sound of the impact echoed through the chamber. Claire staggered but did not fall. A sharp sting spread across her cheek, and her vision blurred for a moment. Gasps filled the air, and even some alien delegates stepped back in shock. The human delegation, seated at the far side of the table, stood to their feet instantly. Captain Daniel Cross, head of the human security team, moved forward, his fists clenched. His guards were ready to intervene, but Claire raised her hand, stopping them. Her voice was steady when she said, "This meeting is over." She turned and walked out without looking back at the king. The humans left the chamber in silence, their footsteps quick on the polished floor. Once in the secure transport bay, the tension broke. Daniel's voice was low, but full of anger. "He struck you in front of everyone. Earth will have to respond to this." Claire shook her head. "Not like you think. If we respond with force now, we give him what he wants. We'll be seen as aggressors." Back aboard the human flagship, the mood was grim. Political leaders on Earth sent urgent messages, instructing the delegation to avoid any military action. The galaxy was watching. The Zotheri Empire was powerful, with fleets that could destroy whole systems. An open war would cost millions of lives. Claire sat alone in her quarters that night, her cheeks still sore. She replayed the moment in her mind again and again. It was not just about her. The strike was meant as a message to all humans, to all weaker worlds that dared to stand in the king's way. Through the viewport, the stars shone cold and distant. She thought about the faces of the smaller world ambassadors who had been in the room. The fear in their eyes when the king attacked her. They were trapped under his rule with no way to fight back. She understood then that this was not only a personal insult, it was a challenge, and she could not ignore it. The next morning, she moved through the ship's corridors, speaking to crew members quietly. She asked about supply routes, patrol schedules, and the security of the Zotheri Palace. She spent hours in the archives, studying maps of the capital world and reading about its history. When Daniel found her in the strategy room late that night, her eyes were tired but determined. "You're planning something," he said. "I'm preparing," Claire replied. "There's a difference." Daniel sat across from her. "Whatever it is, you know the council won't approve it." "Then I won't ask the council," she said softly. Depths of space stretched endlessly outside the viewport, but Claire's thoughts were locked on one place: the Zotheri capital. She didn't know yet how she would do it, but she knew one thing for certain. The Galactic King had made a mistake when he struck her, and one day soon, he would understand just how big that mistake was. The human flagship floated in orbit around the neutral station, its lights glowing against the endless black of space. Inside, the mood was tense. The crew whispered in corridors, their voices low, as news of the Galactic King's strike spread from deck to deck. For many, it was not just an insult to Claire Warren, but a humiliation for the entire human race. Captain Daniel Cross stayed busy, moving between meetings with the command team and secure calls from Earth. The orders from political leaders were clear: avoid escalation at all costs. The Zotheri Empire's power was unmatched, and one wrong move could bring war. Daniel obeyed, but inside he burned with anger. He had seen the look in Claire's eyes when she walked out of the council hall. She was not broken. She was planning. Claire spent most of her time in the data archives. She studied everything about the Zutheri Empire, its leadership, its military, its weaknesses. Official records were clean and controlled. But she knew real information lived in the hidden reports filed by defectors and spies. She spoke quietly with crew members who had served on the edges of Zutheri territory. Each story painted the same picture. The king ruled through fear, crushing any voice of dissent. In the evenings, she visited the medical bay where some alien allies were recovering from skirmishes with the Empire. These beings came from worlds the Zutheri had conquered. Some had lost their homes, others their families. Claire listened without interrupting, storing every detail in her mind. She began to see a pattern in their stories, rumors of unrest inside the Empire itself. One night, as she walked back to her quarters, a figure stepped out from the shadows of the corridor. It was a tall alien with silver-gray skin and deep green eyes. He introduced himself as Varric, a former guard of the royal palace who had deserted years ago. He spoke quickly, glancing around as if afraid to be overheard. "The king fears rebellion," Varric said. "He strikes at you because you challenged him in front of others. But there are many who wish to see him fall. The Empire is not as strong as it appears." Claire studied his face. "Why tell me this? Because you are different," Varric replied. "You do not seek power for yourself. And because you have already made him afraid." He handed her a small data crystal. "This has maps of the capital and its defenses." "You've been moving in places you shouldn't, talking to people you don't know? What are you planning, Claire?" She placed the data crystal on the table. "The king thinks he can strike me and walk away without consequence. I am not going to start a war. But I am going to end his hold over the galaxy." Daniel frowned. "You know that means going into his world, into his palace?" "If the council finds out, they won't," she said, her voice steady. "This is not about politics anymore. It's about justice. For the people he's crushed, for the ones who can't fight for themselves." He looked at her for a long time before speaking. "If you do this, you'll need more than courage. You'll need a team." That night, Claire began choosing the few she could trust. A pilot who had flown supply runs through Zutheri space without being caught. A tech expert who could bypass alien security systems, and 2 alien warriors from worlds the Empire had enslaved. Each of them had a reason to see the king fall. In the quiet hours, Claire sat in her quarters with the data crystal, studying every map and security code. She traced the hidden route Varric had given her, imagining the palace corridors and the places she might be seen. She thought about the king's face when he struck her, the arrogance in his eyes. She thought about the smaller world ambassadors, who had looked away in fear. Outside her viewport, a field of stars stretched on forever. But Claire's focus was locked on one point of light, far away, the Zutheri capital. She whispered to herself, not as a threat, but as a promise. "I'm coming for you." Days passed on the human flagship, but for Claire Warren, time felt like it was moving faster. Every moment was spent preparing. She knew that once she stepped onto the Zutheri capital world, there would be no second chances. The data crystal from Varric was her most valuable tool, but it was also a reminder of the risk. If they failed, no one would be able to rescue them. Claire met with her chosen team in a small, dimly lit conference room away from the main decks. There was Jonas Reed, a pilot with a calm voice and quick reflexes. There was Mia Carter, a skilled technician who could break through almost any security system. Then there were the alien warriors, Karen, whose people had been enslaved by the Zutheri for generations. And Dahl, a former rebel fighter with scars that told his own history. Each member sat quietly, listening to Claire's plan. She explained the route into the capital. It would take a disguised freighter through a trade lane, land in the lower city, and move on foot toward the palace's hidden access tunnel. From there, they would navigate old service corridors until they reached the inner security zone. It was dangerous, but it was their only chance. We cannot take a large force, Claire said. Too many will be noticed. We must move fast, stay invisible, and be ready for anything. Jonas leaned forward. What happens when we get inside? We disable the palace power core, Claire replied.
Ow.
Without it, the royal guard will be blind for a few minutes. In that time, the local rebels can strike. Mia adjusted her datapad. If this map is correct, I can overload the security grid in the lower halls. But once I do, they'll know we're there. Then we make sure we're already moving, Claire said. Later that evening, Claire walked alone along the ship's observation deck. Outside, the stars seemed peaceful, but she knew that somewhere out there, the king sat on his throne, certain of his power. She thought about his face when he struck her, and the fear he had tried to hide behind his anger. The next morning, the team began gathering supplies. Jonas checked the freighter's engines and plotted the route. Mia loaded encryption tools, code breakers, and small devices for jamming palace sensors. Kareen and Dahl sharpened their weapons and spoke quietly in their own language, planning how they would move in combat.
Ack!
Before departure, Captain Daniel Cross met Claire in the hangar. This is your last chance to walk away, he said. Once you go, there's no turning back. Claire looked at him steadily. I made my choice the moment he struck me. Daniel nodded. Then go, and come back alive. Hours later, the freighter drifted away from the flagship, its hull disguised to look like a civilian transport. The journey was tense but quiet. They passed through customs checks at the edge of Zo3 space without raising suspicion. Claire stayed in the cockpit with Jonas, her eyes fixed on the swirling lights of hyperspace. When they dropped out of faster-than-light travel, the Zo3 capital came into view, a massive city of dark towers and glowing spires stretching across the horizon of a planet wrapped in clouds. Traffic lanes were filled with ships of all sizes, and patrol craft moved in constant patterns above the city. Jonas guided the freighter into the lower docks, where merchants and travelers came and went under the watch of armed guards. The team disembarked, blending into the crowd. Claire wore a simple cloak, keeping her face hidden. Kareen and Dahl walked slightly behind, their weapons concealed under long coats. They moved through narrow streets lit by neon signs in the glow of alien fires. Markets buzzed with activity, and the air was filled with the scent of strange spices and machinery. Mia kept her datapad close, checking their position every few steps. Finally, they reached the entrance to the hidden tunnel. It was a small, rusted hatch at the base of an abandoned storage building. Corinne forced it open, and the group slipped inside. The air was damp and stale, and the walls were covered in faded markings from a time before the palace was built. They walked in silence, their footsteps echoing softly. Claire felt the weight of every second passing. Somewhere above them, the king ruled as if no one could touch him. But soon that would change. When they reached the first security gate, Mia crouched beside the panel, her fingers flying over the controls. The gate opened with a faint hiss. Beyond it, the shadows stretched deep into the heart of the palace. Claire took a breath, stepped forward, and led the way in. The air inside the palace tunnels was heavy and cold, and Claire Warren led the way, her eyes scanning every corner as the dim lights flickered overhead. The narrow passage twisted and turned, carrying them deeper under the heart of the Zo3 capital. Each step took them closer to the power core and to the Galactic King himself. Mia Carter moved just behind Claire, her datapad glowing faintly as she monitored the palace's internal security systems. We have 6 minutes before the patrol in this sector loops back, she whispered. Jonas Reed nodded, adjusting the small pack on his back that carried the charges for the power core. Kareen and Dahl took up the rear, their movements silent. Both kept their hands close to their concealed weapons. Every sound seemed to echo the drip of water from overhead pipes, the faint hum of the palace's massive energy systems. They reached a junction where the tunnel split into two. Claire studied the map on the data crystal. Left leads to the service halls, she said quietly. Right goes straight to the core, but it's tighter and more guarded. We take the right, Corinne said without hesitation. Fewer people, fewer eyes. They moved on, the walls narrowing until they had to walk in single file. Ahead, 2 Zo3 guards stood at a steel door. Their armor glimmered in the pale light, and their long energy spears blocked the way. Claire signaled the others to stop. Dahl stepped forward silently, moving with the skill of someone who had done this many times before. In 2 quick moves, the guards were down, stunned before they could raise an alarm. Jonas and Corinne dragged them into a shadowed alcove. Mia worked on the steel door's lock, her fingers quick and sure. After a tense few seconds, it slid open with a soft hiss. The room beyond was vast and filled with the deep thrum of the palace's power core. Huge energy conduits ran from floor to ceiling, glowing with shifting colors. Jonas began placing the charges in a careful pattern while Mia connected them to a remote trigger. Claire stood watch, her heart beating fast. She knew once the core went offline, they would have only minutes before the entire palace went into lockdown. Suddenly, a voice echoed from behind them. "You should not have come here." They turned to see the Galactic King himself standing in the doorway, flanked by 4 royal guards. His bronze skin glowed under the light of the power conduits, and his crystal crown pulsed with a dark, angry light. Claire stepped forward, her voice steady. "You remember me." His eyes narrowed. "The human who spoke too much. I should have ended you in the council hall. And I should have let my people answer you then," Claire said. "But this is better." The king raised his hand and the guards moved in. Corinne and Dahl met them head-on, blades flashing in the shifting light. Jonas pulled out his sidearm, firing to cover Mia as she finished connecting the last of the charges. Claire faced the king, who moved with surprising speed for his size. He struck with the same brutal force as before, but this time she was ready. She ducked under his arm and drove her elbow into his side. He staggered but recovered quickly, his hands reaching for her. Round them the battle raged. Mia shouted, "Charges are set. We have less than 2 minutes." Claire pressed forward, trading blows with the king. She felt the heat of the power conduits on her back, the vibrations of the palace around her. The king tried to force her back, but she refused to give ground. She thought of the faces of those he had ruled through fear, and she struck harder. Corinne cut down the last of the royal guards, and Jonas grabbed Claire's arm. "We have to go now." She backed away from the king, who stood breathing heavily, rage burning in his eyes. "This is not over," he growled. "No," Claire said. "It's just starting."
Ow.
Mia hit the trigger, and the first shockwave tore through the chamber.
Ow.
The power conduits flared, then went dark.
Ow.
Alarms screamed through the palace, and the floor trembled under their feet. The team turned and ran, racing back through the narrow tunnels as chaos erupted above. Somewhere in the city, rebel forces would be moving now, striking at the weakened palace defenses. Claire didn't look back. The king had seen her walk away once before, but this time, it was not retreat. It was victory in motion. The tunnels shook as Claire Warren and her team raced toward the exit. The alarms were deafening now, echoing through every corridor. The palace power core had gone dark, and above them, the Zothari capital was sliding into chaos. Jonas Reed led the way, his eyes scanning each corner before they moved forward. Mia Carter kept glancing at her datapad, tracking the nearest patrols through the last bits of stolen data before the network collapsed. Corinne and Dahl stayed close to the rear, weapons ready in case the royal guards returned. As they reached the outer hatch, the sound of battle drifted down from the streets above. Rebel forces had begun their attack, using the blackout to push toward the palace. Claire knew this was their moment. If they escaped now, the rebels could finish what they started. But before they could climb out, the hatch above slammed open. The Galactic King dropped into the tunnel, his crystal crown glowing faintly in the dark. His armor was scorched from the shockwave, but his eyes burned with fury. "You will not leave here alive," he growled. Claire stepped forward, her voice calm. "You still think you can command fear? But your city is burning, and your power is slipping away." He charged at her, the narrow tunnel forcing them into close combat. His strikes were heavy, each one meant to break her. She blocked and dodged, using the tight space to keep him from swinging freely. Her arms ached with the effort, but she kept moving. Behind her, the others held back, knowing this fight was hers. She remembered the council hall, the sting of his hand against her face, the silence of those who feared him. That memory gave her strength. She fainted to the side, then drove her knee into his midsection. He staggered, but caught her arm and hurled her into the tunnel wall. Pain shot through her shoulder, but she forced herself back to her feet. "You think you can kill me?" the king snarled. She moved faster now, striking at the weak points in his armor. Each hit made him stumble more. Finally, she drove her blade between the plates at his side. His roar filled the tunnel, echoing like thunder. He collapsed to one knee, his crown slipping from his head. Claire pulled the blade free and stepped back as he fell forward, motionless. The crystal crown rolled across the floor, its light fading. For a moment, the tunnel was silent, except for the distant sound of battle above. Corinne stepped forward, looking down at the fallen king. "It is done," he said. Claire took a deep breath and nodded. "Then we leave." They climbed through the hatch into the chaos of the capital streets. Fires burned in the distance, and rebels fought Zotheri soldiers in every direction. The palace towers loomed behind them, dark and broken. Jonas led them through the winding streets, avoiding the worst of the fighting. They reached the lower docks just as the freighter came into view. The ship's engines were already warming, ready to take them away. As they boarded, Mia looked back toward the city. The rebels will win now. Without him, the rest of the royal family won't hold power for long. Claire watched the skyline for a moment. That's their fight now. We've done our part. The freighter lifted off, rising above the burning city. From the air, they could see crowds in the streets, some fighting, others cheering. The palace was surrounded, its gates broken. When they cleared the atmosphere, Jonas set a course away from the capital. The stars stretched out before them once more. Corinne and Dahl sat quietly, their eyes fixed on the view. For them, this was the first taste of freedom in years. Back on the human flagship, Captain Daniel Cross met them in the hangar. He said nothing at first, only looking at Claire. She gave a small nod, and he understood. "It's over?" he asked. "For him, yes," Claire said. "But the galaxy is still watching." Later, as the ship moved through the quiet darkness of space, Claire stood alone at the viewport. The memory of the king's final moments played in her mind, but it was not victory she felt, it was resolve. There would be other battles, other tyrants. But for now, the strike that had started in a council hall was finished, and the human woman he thought he could break had changed the balance of power in the galaxy forever.